And there we go. We're live.
Hello,
Hey,
hello, everyone.
hello.
Welcome to An Honest Look. How are you, Rick? How are you?
I I am awesome. I told you I was awesomeness this today.
You did say that. I want to welcome our wonderful guest, Purdeep Sangha. And yeah, we're really looking forward to hearing his story, hearing
Yeah.
the work that he does, and the impact that he's having in the world. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce him to you, and then we're gonna let him talk. So Purdeep Sangha is the world's leader in complete strategic advising. He's an award-winning author of The Complete Man and the TV show host of Mind Your Own Business. He's also an entrepreneur, speaker, and podcaster. Wow, so much in such a short bio to talk about and to unpack. And um, I would like to actually at some point talk about your book as well. I know
Mhm.
that's something that you're eager to share with us. But before we get into that, I would love for you to share with our audience a little bit what has been your story, how you got to do the work that you do, what has led you to want to impact men the way that you do.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me, both Rick and Fetty. I appreciate that here. So you could say what do I do today? I would say I'm a husband, I'm a father. Those are my biggest roles. I'm an entrepreneur. Also help other entrepreneurs and business owners. But my journey really started with my parents, my family upbringing. I think like most people, my parents were immigrants. They immigrated over to Canada in the early 70s, and they didn't have any formal Western education. All they knew how to do was work hard. So they worked and eventually saved up enough money to buy a part of a piece of land, an orchard, and then built their business around that. So I pretty much grew up on an orchard.
Wow.
As my early memories, my parents would put my brother and I in an apple bin while they'd be out there working on the orchard. So it was an awesome upbringing. I would say I wouldn't change it for anything at all. It was a lot of hard work. We had to get up early mornings, like 3:30 in the morning, be up there before the birds were even out, and get stuff ready. But it was such an amazing upbringing, and just I would say the peace, the content that came along with it, being outside in nature all day. Whereas a lot of kids these days are growing up in front of their screens.
Mhm.
It was a different life. But I grew up in business, and I was always fascinated by it. So I was always fascinated, especially when it came to a family business. How does one family be more successful than another family business when they have access to the same resources? And then I went through, you can say, the typical academic world. I went to a number of different business schools, worked in the corporate career for a while, 14 years. I was a successful executive until I left and started my own firm. And my firm does a number of things, and some of it's actually very unique. But the reason I would say part of my path was actually created for me, and part of it was based on my skill set. I grew up in an interesting environment where my parents, being of Indian descent, you can say, or ethnicity, um, we had, you can say, a traditional family, traditional gender roles as well. And also, but my mom worked just as hard as my dad. You can say she was out there on the orchard working physical labor as well. But I grew up with traditional family values. And so that's part of the work that we do when it comes to working with men in leadership roles. But there was an interesting element that I would say really landed or gave me the skill set, and that was my dad was challenged from the perspective of he worked his butt off. He did everything he could for my mom and our family, basically, but he really didn't have a life outside of that.
Mhm.
He was, they would visit family and do those kinds of things and travel, but you could tell he wasn't fulfilled. There was something missing, and as a result he struggled with alcoholism. And so he struggled with that for his entire life, as long as I can remember. And eventually what ended up happening is it caught up with him. His diabetes accelerated, and then he eventually had a sudden heart attack and passed away. So the reason why I do what I do here is because I was fascinated at a young age, and probably not in the best way, because it was scary. My dad was a big guy. He was like physically strong, big, very masculine man, but he also taught me, how to be emotional as well. But when he drank too much, he was a completely different person. And as a
Mhm.
young kid, it was very scary. So I was always trying to figure out when my dad would drink. and how much he would drink. And I started to watch his behavior, and I started to watch his habits, and I could tell when he was going to drink. And I would tell my mom, he's going to drink today. And my mom's like, no, he's not going to drink today. And most of the time I was pretty accurate, because his routine or his daytime, you could tell his mannerisms, his habits would lead to a certain way, his way of drinking. So that got me into the world of psychology, into neuroscience as well. And I studied that for the last 25 years. But I'm going to kind of sum it up here. I don't want to talk too long, but what we do is, because of my unique background and work and seeing my dad's challenges, and having the background in science and psychology and neuroscience, I'm able to now be able to have some very interesting, and you can say direct and tough conversations with particularly men when it comes to how we live our lifestyles. And so we talk about everything from drug addiction or drug abuse to relationships, parenting, fatherhood, being a husband. There's so much in that. And we incorporate that into the business side, because majority of the people that we work with are business professionals. I would say all of them, but we do a unique thing where we work with them on the business side, but also on the personal side, because we found out very early when we started our firm that we can help someone grow their business and give them a plan and the strategy, but that wouldn't mean that they actually would execute on it. Right. Because if they had something wrong going, something not so great at home or in their relationship or from a health aspect, that would just completely slow them down from execute on the business side. So we made a very conscious effort over the last 6 years to build those two elements together and actually integrate it. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for business professionals. So we help them be successful in the business, but also be better relationship partners, be better parents, and just have a more fulfilling life overall, stemming from the mission of helping people live a more fulfilling life. And so, and that all came from, you can say, seeing my dad struggle in our family challenges.
Right. Wow, that's such a powerful story, and it's oftentimes the fuel to the purpose that we find and what we go on and do in life. And I love that you're touching upon the fact that a business is not just a business; it's a reflection of what's happening within the person whose business that is. And it's just as important to work on all those different parts of our lives as it is to work on the strategy side of business and the how. It's also the person behind the business that is going to sabotage, not take action, and very much affect the results of the business. So I love that you're doing this kind of work, because that to me is a paradigm shift. That is not something that even when I grew up was anyone ever talked about, anyone ever put any attention on. It's just work hard, keep pushing, put in the hours, and you'll get the results. But that's couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, and I agree with you, Fatí and Purdeep, when you say about the connection between your personal and your business life. And there are a lot of times I spent this notion or this concept of a work-life balance, and how difficult it was to try and work that, until I started to see that there was actually a wholesality around my personal and business life. Like it really was connected. And so I kind of like how you're pointing towards that, that they are that way.
Well, I'd like to take a look at it as, and this is one of the things that I have a chapter in my book called Work-Life Balance, but we kind of morph that because it's about work-life harmony. That's essentially what it is. I think this concept of balance is misconstrued, and here's why. When most people, it took me some time to figure this out. When people think of work-life balance, the number one factor that they play into that is time. How much time am I spending? Am I not spending enough hours with my family in the evening or on the weekend? But it's not necessarily time. It's the quality of time, the quality of presence that you have. So in our particular instance, because we grew up in an agricultural world, we lived on the orchard, and we spent a lot of time out there on the orchard working, but it was part of our lifestyle. It was part of the way we lived. There was work-life harmony. We absolutely loved it. And this is a quote from, you can say, Rumi, an ancient philosopher, where he said, when you're working, the only thing that you have a right to is your labor. You don't have the right to the fruits of the labor. And that was really interesting. And for us, it was actually very literal as well, because on the orchard, we could work 9 months. And if we didn't like what we did, if we didn't enjoy it, if we didn't make it a family endeavor, there were times, and this happens very often, probably 1 in every 3 or 4 years, where you have a hailstorm, and a 5-minute hailstorm can wipe out your entire apple crop or entire cherry. Like, it is ridiculous what can happen. But in 5 minutes, that can change your course, your destiny for that season. And if you don't enjoy the first 9 months of it, well, guess what? You're going to be pretty saddened at the end of it. So we learn to enjoy, you can say, that part of working. And I think this is why it's so important when people work, that they enjoy what they do. And I think that's the key difference. If you're working, but you're not enjoying the work, that's a sign.
Right.
So can you say your focus is more on the process or the journey, as opposed to being so focused on results?
Well, the interesting thing here is, in our society, it's all about results. And I'm a big believer of results. And we have an entire division that's around high performance. And because here's what studies show, and so we have an entire research arm as well. Like, we've done a lot of research with over 4,000 individuals, partner with over 17 universities and research institutions in Canada and the US. Here's what we know. When you are a higher performer, when you actually focus on results, you can actually be happier as well. It's really interesting. But what we do focus on more, Rick, is the person you are becoming or being. That is far more important than the results. So that's what we focus on. When you say the process, yes, absolutely. We focus on the individual. How are they feeling? How are they growing? How are their skills advancing? Because that's what ultimately leads to more fulfillment, aside from relationships and health. It's, how do I feel about myself? Do I feel like I'm getting better every day in terms of my skill set or my intelligence or the impact that I'm having? So we focus very much on the being aspect. And that's one of the core concepts of within my book, The Complete Man, is a lot of people do focus on external results.
Right.
So there's 2 types of results. There's internal results and external results. The external results are basically a byproduct of your internal results, who you're becoming, your skill set, your mindset, your emotional capacity. But most people try to change their external results. And even if they do change their external results, guess what? They may not feel any better as a result of it, based on that.
Yes, absolutely.
So we do it in the reverse aspect. We show people how to get the external results, but you start with internally first.
And I would imagine that when there's also some work that you do in, like, helping people, like, find alignment within that, right? Because sometimes we think that we want something, a result, but it's more driven by conditioning. Right. But when you do the work first internally of who you actually want to become, right, and the reason that drives you there, right, that's a very different way to go about it, because there's an alignment there. Right. So there's nothing, what I'm hearing you say is that results are important. It's just the way that we go about it and the way that we get there that's a little different, because we're taking it from the inside out.
And what we do is, so there's three models that we have, or 3 factors. So there's the achievement framework, which everybody is looking for, right? Everybody wants to achieve something. There's also performance. But in all honesty, here's how it works out. Most people want to perform at their best. That's what they want. They want to be a high performer. But as a high performer, so the analogy that I use is, let's just say you're playing on a basketball team and your basketball team is doing amazing. You're one of the best basketball teams out there in terms of your normal season. Well, when you get to the finals, you want to win the championship, right? There's no point in being a high performer or a high performing team if you're not going to win the championship. So that's the achievement side. We perform because we want to achieve something. But what a lot of people miss out is the third element, which is fulfillment. And it's a cyclical aspect. It's performance, achievement, then fulfillment. And it all kind of circles around, because if you skip out on the fulfillment aspect, you bounce between achievement and performance, and you miss out. And what it ends up happening is that's what people talk about, spinning, getting stuck in that wheel, right? You're spinning your wheels all the time. People constantly chasing more money, more achievements, whatever it looks like, more status, and they never feel like they're good enough. It's because they haven't focused on the fulfillment side. Interestingly, the people who are actually more fulfilled in life actually perform better as well.
Yeah.
Right.
In all aspects of their life.
Right. I love that. Love that.
And yet we're so conditioned too, like you said earlier, like our Western society is very results oriented. Like how are you doing is a key question, right? It's like, like how's your business going?
What do you do? I live in New York City.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, right. Yeah.
What do you do? That's the very first question you get often. And like, I now purposely just don't even answer. No, I do life. What do you do?
It is part of our society.
Yeah, very much so.
It's funny you mentioned that. It just reminds me of a story. So I'm from the west coast of Canada. Originally grew up in a small town called Kelowna, lived in Vancouver. And then I was headhunted and moved out to Ontario in the Toronto, just outside of the Toronto area.
And we forgive you for that, by the way.
Yeah, I left BC. I've always wanted to go back there. I got to convince my wife.
Lots of room for you. Come on.
So when I came out here, and I was single at that time, the dating scene was completely different. So in BC, it's a little bit more laid back, right? It's a little bit more chill. We tree huggers, you could say, in certain areas. And coming out to Toronto, when I was in the dating scene, it was funny. A lot of the women would say, "Yeah, what do you do?" And some would even go, be like, "Well, so how much do you make?" in a roundabout way. And when I would, it was hilarious. And when women would ask me that, I would literally say, "Well, I pick apples," because we still had the family. It's still in our family right now, but I would just use that and be like, "Yeah, I pick apples," and just to see their response. And if women were kind of turned off, they were turned off. And if they weren't, then it'd be like, okay, so let's continue the conversation. But it is a norm in our society, status, achievement. It's become one of those key pillars in terms of just basic conversations.
Right. And also like how someone perceives you, labels you, your worth and value, right? So, which is even more important to really focus on that inner work of us not putting that value onto how everybody else sees us or values us, or like not taking that on, but really seeing our own worth and value instead. So there's a question from Dawn here that I'm going to bring up if you want to answer this. How do you show them to change internally first?
Oh wow, yeah, that's a loaded question. Showing them and helping them through the path is tougher, but here's essentially where we start. And this is if it's an entrepreneur or an executive or whoever we're working with, most people build their life backwards. And here's what I mean by that. A business owner will start a business and then they'll build their lifestyle around their business. That's really interesting. Isn't your business supposed to help you create the lifestyle that you want? So what we actually do is we take it one step further. How do we get people to think internally first? And this throws a lot of people off, especially guys. How do you want to feel when you hit that goal? What are the top 3 to 5 emotions? And why is that important? Because we all, as individuals, do everything in life. Majority of the things we do based on feelings.
Right.
It's to satisfy some kind of a feeling. And so if you grow your business to X amount and you make X amount of money, and at the end of the day, you're not feeling those emotions, what did you do it for in the first place? So I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman it's a classic one. He was a very successful gentleman, making $10 million a year, wanted to make 100 million. When I asked him what kind of emotions he wanted to have, I got him to list top 3 to 5. He's had peace / content on one of them. And I said, that's really interesting. So you want to make $100 million a year in your business. How much peace and content do you think you're going to get with a business that's making that much? How much peace and content do you have now making 10 million? He's like, I'm pretty darn stressed out. So making that much money, why are you doing it in the first place? Because you're probably going to have more stress. if we were just take a linear perspective, you're going to have probably 10 times more stress.
Mm-hmm.
And when he thought of it from that perspective, he had to work backwards and say, that's really interesting. He no longer needed to make $100 million. So how do you start internally? Is you get them to ask questions. Why are you doing it in the first place? What are you trying to feel at the end of the day? One of the core things that we do when we work with individuals, and it's a scary one for some people, is we actually get them to go away for a period of time. I go away every year for 4 or 5 days, no family, nobody, just myself, secluded place, me and my thoughts, because I want to strip myself from all of those external pressures and say, who am I inside? What do I truly want? Not necessarily as a father, as a husband, or as a son, or as a brother, but what do I want in my life? And that's really where you start internally, because we as social beings are flooded. This is how we are built. We are built based on other people's expectations and belief systems.
Yeah.
So,
When we strip those away, we finally get closer to who we want to be internally. So that's the first place where I would start. It's not an easy process, but it's like if you take yourself out of the roles and the external factors and influences that you have, and a lot of people feel like they're being weighed down, right? Like it's a weight on their shoulders. Well, when you strip that away, you feel like you're walking around differently. You can think differently as an individual rather than as a role in society. So that's kind of a long-winded answer.
I absolutely love that. It really is what Rick and I always talk about. It's always this, right? Mm-hmm. It's always like turning inwards, right? And if it takes for you to go 4 days away to make that easier, right? That there's so much power to that. I mean, I do that every weekend. Isolate myself in the woods and I go for a walk where there's no one around and I sit with my thoughts. I walk around and process a lot, and there is huge value to that. So I can't even imagine doing 4 or 5 days of that. I think I would come back like renewed.
Well, when you think of a lot of the great thinkers and philosophers of the past, they all took long walks. Sometimes 40 days, right?
Yep.
But there's something really, really interesting about that. There's a phrase that I've been sort of playing with a lot when it comes to motivation of doing things, and the phrase is "in order to." And I find it really fascinating when I study the things that I'm doing myself personally in order to. And what you're pointing to around the feelings, like I'm doing this so in order to, I'm not going to be judged, or I'm doing this in order to feel better. And it's a bit of a trap. It's a bit of a trap. Like you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it to appease a feeling or something outside of you, right?
Well, that's where the mastery element comes in, because if you can learn how to master your mind and your emotions, the mind is a trickier one. Emotions you can do because you regulate it through your body. But when you learn how to do that, you can have that feeling immediately. So a lot of the times then we realize and we rethink and basically double check, why are we even doing this in the first place? Do I even need to? Because if I, like you said, in order to feel that way, I need to do this. Well, what if I can just feel that way without doing it? That's kind of interesting.
And this is what happened recently in a coaching conversation. A lady that's been in business for 15 years had built up a business, and she came to the realization of asking that very same question: why am I doing this? What do I really want? And she realized that I want to be a mom. I want to be a stay-at-home mom and and homeschool my kids. I wanted, kind of this. And because she was always struggling, like the business side of things was sort of, she felt it was more culturally that she had to do it. And then, and literally just closed shop. Like she had that kind of a business and said, you know what, this is what, and I couldn't believe the transformation in her body, in her face, in her language. It was almost like there's a huge weight was taken off of her. And, and who knows what might come from that. She might feel like starting something different, but the business was such an anchor for her. And she realized how much it was, and it wasn't really what she really wanted. So have you found those kind of experiences in
All the time. I would say almost every single person.
Yeah.
So I very few, I would say, individuals have gotten to the point where they're fully aligned. Because there's always those external factors. Anytime we have external factors, and it's just part of being human beings, is we are social creatures and we are influenced by others. So we're going to have that all the time, but rarely are we able to strip those on a daily basis. The 4 to 5 days going away once a year, that's one thing. But if you can do that daily, whether it's a morning exercise or an evening exercise, and say, what are the pressures that I have on me right now? Which ones are acceptable? Which ones are not? It's just like if you take a shower every day, you need to, right? To get that, to get the oil off your skin and feel fresh again. Same thing from our emotional perspective or social perspective. We should be doing that. I would say most people are living that way, Rick, are just not happy with how they are living. Very few. And it's because we live more complex lives. And it's really interesting. We have AI, a lot more AI coming out recently, and it just launched, right? It's going to be really interesting to see what ends up happening and all this technology. But I don't see people getting happier. I don't know about you, but I'm not seeing a lot of people get more enjoyment out of life. In fact, I feel it's going the other way. And our clients and our research is showing that there's more people with mental health challenges and depression and anxiety. So we need to do something about that. We need to actually reflect, I would say, and actually see, are we actually on the right path?
Well, so there's an interesting TED Talk by a guy by the name of Michael Neal, who is a colleague, and he talks about why are we not awesomer? And and he points to the fact, when you look at how many self-help books out there, how many workshops are available to people, how much support and various other things are out there, and we've had a few other guests that are sort of along those same what's being offered out there. Why aren't we doing better? Like and you're actually correct. Like, it appears that we're getting worse with our mental health, given all the things that are available to us.
Well, can I say something to that, and even to the point that you were making of this? This is not, there's a big realignment that at some point we have to make, like the example that you were giving, Rick, of this woman that realized that business wasn't serving her. But that process of realigning ourselves, it's a constant process. And I feel like there's a huge misunderstanding in the self-development world. I've done the work, I'm done. Now I'm good. Why isn't my life, like perfect or happening the way I want it? Well, because the work is never done. You realign yourself. Maybe it's a massive shift at some point, but that check-in process has to happen constantly, because tomorrow I may not want what I want today. What's aligned today may not be aligned in a year from now, right? So that is a process that I think most often people misunderstand as being a one and done thing. It's not one and done. It's a lifestyle. It's mastery, like you were pointing to. It's something that it's important to have a little bit of that every day.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with what you're saying, because that is for me, that's a fundamental principle of life. It's constant learning. So I'm not a religious person by say, but I grew up in a household where our religion was Sikhism. So for those who are familiar with it, and the word Sikh actually means to be a disciple of or to learn. And so the whole purpose there is that we are constantly learning throughout life. That's the purpose of life, is to continue to learn. So that's built around that philosophy. It was really interesting because I grew up in a fairly traditional household, as I mentioned, fairly religious. We would go to the Sikh temple every weekend, multiple days. And my grandfather immigrated. Both my grandparents immigrated. My dad's parents immigrated over as well and lived with us. So we had, a traditional extended family as well. My grandfather was a very spiritual and religious man. He taught me a lot about spirituality, mindfulness, meditation. I grew up with it at a very young age. also principles of life. He was in the Indian military for 30 plus years as well. So taught me about values, your word is your bond, and other elements of just being a respectable person in society. But his father, so my great-grandfather, was a spiritual teacher in India for 60 years. And it was so really interesting to have that come through our lineage and experience that. So whenever I see, or all the philosophies primarily say the same thing: life is a constant journey of learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's about. And people ask all the time, what's the purpose of life? And my perspective is, A, you got to live it, right? And most people aren't living it. And so you got to live it and experience it to the fullest, because why else will we be here?
Yeah.
So one of my colleagues said, it's like being thrown in Disneyland and saying, yeah, don't enjoy Disneyland. Of course you want to enjoy Disneyland, right? It's a place of happiness. And that's what life is supposed to be. And then the second element is continuous to learn, right? As you were saying. So both those are, I would say, inherent parts of living a fulfilling life.
Absolutely. We were laughing because before we came on, I said something about Disneyland and how happy I was that I'm going to skip that one because my ex is going to take my kids.
You don't want to go to Disneyland? Oh.
That's why Rick is laughing.
I'll go with your ex. I love Disneyland.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're laughing. We didn't mean to laugh at you.
Oh, it's all good.
A couple of questions from Don here. I think he wants to understand a little bit more the process that you're talking about in terms of, I can read them to you. Let's see. Is there a particular process you use to help people tune into their heart consistently? What do you mean regulate emotions with your body? Vagus nerve breathing?
Yeah. And so does he have another question? Those are the main ones?
No, I think those are the questions.
Yeah. So if we take a look at, I'm going to answer the second one first, is regulating emotions. If we take a look at it, it's a somatic response. Although it's coming from our brain, our bodies are the ones where it feels like it's being represented. And there's a lot of studies to show, and our research shows us too, you move parts of your body in a certain way, you can actually change your emotional state. So the science is out there. So yes, can you go from, and if you take a look at people's bodies, people's physiology, people who are more depressed or in a different emotional state tend to be more closed off, whereas someone that is happier or more in a more confident state, you can see they're in a different body position. So just by positioning your body, you can actually change your physiology and you can actually change your emotional state. If you take of all the ancient practices, right? So we're in a time right now where science has intersected ancient practices like mindfulness, meditation, yoga, for example. And what they are showing is, yes, your brain actually changes, your body changes, your lungs change, your heart rates change. But one of the things that's common amongst all of those practices, whether it's Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever it might be, in yoga, is breathing. The core, the central unity between all these practices is breathing. So if you can manage your breathing, yes, you can actually manage your emotions. If you can manage your body, you can manage your emotions. So absolutely, when I'm in a bad mood, I know I got to actually go out and start working out. I got a set of dumbbells in my office here. I'll just do something that changes my physiology to get myself into a different emotional state. Now there's things, and yes, you have to manage your mind as well, but the mind is tougher to manage. It is much tougher to manage because all of these thoughts that come through, it's crazy, right? We don't have the exact number, but we could have anywhere between 15,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day. How are you going to manage that? There's no, and majority of those thoughts are unconscious. So, and how are you going to manage something you don't even know exists? So it's almost like a futile attempt to be able to manage your mind, but you still need to. It's not that you can't. Absolutely you can. There's mindfulness practices, meditation practices, breathing, but you're better off being able to manage your body because your body actually helps you manage your mind. So,
and the work that I do, it's really like we were talking about this earlier this morning in a group session where we have no control over what comes into us. And if we point ourselves towards, well, I need to figure out how to do that, it's it's a lot of struggle and a lot of disappointment, right? It's sort of like, I know I shouldn't be having these thoughts. Well, okay, you're going to have them. It's part of your conditioning. It's part of your human experience. How you manage them, or how you control the experience, right, is fundamentally different, right? Because there's so many other teachers, Michael Singer and Sadhguru and those guys, talk about, the thought comes in, we don't have to act on it. Just let it go. Like something else will come around, right? And I've spent a lot of time beating myself up because why am I always having this thought? Like, it's like, is there something wrong with me? No, you're just having a human experience.
Yeah, and there's millions of other people that are probably having a very similar, or if not exact same thought. But there are also this one concept to actually help shift your thinking in a different manner, and that is goal setting. And so goal setting, our brain is actually a goal-oriented organ and a goal-directed organ. And there's two main things that our brain does. It constantly problem solves and it constantly predicts. It's a prediction mechanism as well. And what does it do? Like what's the impetus? What guides that? Well, what can guide those two elements is setting a goal. So research shows that if you are better at setting goals and aligning your emotions with those goals, you're going to be able to have better performance, and you're probably going to be more fulfilled as well. So anytime I also have a challenging thought, see, the reason why our goals our thoughts are very interesting because they perpetuate, especially negative thoughts, right? The negative bias, right? And you have one negative thought, it just barrels. It's like a snowball down a hill. You'll have more and more. And that's why you got to cut it off right away and go back to something. So rather than thinking about the thing that you don't want, you got to think about the thing that you do want. And a way to do that, it's not always easy. The way to do that is to set a goal. And so you always got to direct yourself back to that goal. And it's a conscious process. It's not something that's natural. It's something that we have to constantly do. So I'm always writing goals down on my sticky notes and right in front of me. So I bring it top of mind all the time. So in a way, we have to take control of our conscious thinking by setting those goals. Now, people in Western society, we have misconstrued that and made it more about achievement rather than directing our thoughts.
So there's I would like some clarification.
Absolutely.
So I hear the confusion that we sometimes, so goals and achievement. And you're saying there's some separation between the two. There's a distinction between the two.
Yes, absolutely. There is a distinction because the goal is the result. The achievement is a result. The goal could be a state of being. So what you're doing is, so I can set a goal, for example, to direct my thoughts a certain way. So rather than, let's just say if you're let's just say you've got into an argument with your spouse, instead of saying, well, why, your mind is going to be like, why, what happened? Why did that person do that? My relationship sucks, or whatever that is, rather than thinking, what do I want out of my relationship? How do I want to experience this?
Oh, you froze.
It's not going to shift immediately, but it will shift.
Can you repeat that? You were frozen for a minute. Just repeat that.
Sorry, I was just going to say your mind isn't going to shift immediately, and it's not going to be perfect, but it's just like anything else. It's a skill. Right. And so if you take a look at any other practice, whether it's yoga, whether it's Tai Chi, everything else, if you take a look at the meaning of yoga, and yoga is an ancient practice. It's from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means basically to bind with or to yoke. You become one with. This is something my grandfather taught me, which means that when you have the discipline to do the practice over and over again until it becomes part of you, it's no longer a discipline. It's part of you. Yeah. That's true. And now you have the freedom. So discipline actually leads to freedom. If you have the discipline of setting goals that are more positive in a more positive state, what ends up happening is eventually you actually free your mind because it's become a part of you. Right. And so, no, you can't control your thoughts 110%. I don't even know what percent you can actually control your thoughts, but can you get better at managing them? Absolutely. And that requires a little bit of discipline. And goal setting is actually one of those elements.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
No.
The way I hear that is almost like the way you're talking about goal setting is like just setting your reticular activating system onto the things that you want.
Yeah. You focus on what you want, not what you don't want.
Right. So that your mind, because your mind is a goal achieving machine, is going to bring you all of those experiences, make you notice all the things that you need to achieve that goal, that intention, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
I'm hearing it. Yeah.
And it's so interesting how it's part of our survival mechanism, but how we focus on the negative aspects of things. And like you said, like our mind or our left brain or whatever is all geared to solving problems. The minute that it notices a bad feeling or it says there's something wrong. There's something here I need to solve. So I'm going to focus on this bad thing and see if I can actually solve it. Right. Which is, again, going down rabbit holes. So it's really interesting how you like you said, focus on that goal. Are you also referring to your why?
Yeah, because those are a little bit different. So I would say goal is something that you want to achieve, whether it's a state, whether it's a result, whatever it is, where your goal should align with your purpose ultimately.
Right.
And your purpose is something bigger. Okay. Now, your purpose is absolutely important because purpose is a key element in inspiration and drive. And it's actually aligned to the neurotransmitters in your brain that lead to movement and shifting yourself towards your goals. So having that goal is important. And I'm glad you brought that up. Why you want to achieve that goal, I would say, is just as important, or if not more important, if you find yourself low in energy or drive, because there is a neurochemical aspect to that as well. And purpose has been one of the strongest drivers for motivation and inspiration in individuals. So I'm glad you brought that up because that is very important.
Yeah. And you work on that as part of your workshops? Or
absolutely, because through our research we've identified there's a number of different elements, 10 in fact, that actually are involved in inspiration. And so we include those. Most people aren't aware of all of them. People have heard about them, read them in books, but the more of these 10 elements that you have, the more likely you are to have more inspiration on a daily basis. And that's what leads to, ultimately, when you take a look at most people's challenges, it is typically, I would say 80% of them, it's a lack at some point in time. It's not necessarily the mechanism. They just lose some kind of drive or energy or motivation. And that's essentially what it is. They lose track of one of those 10 elements, or become, they fall prone to, chasing something else. Especially in these days, right? We see social media posts and be like, oh, I got to take a look into that, or, go into that business avenue. And so with the more of those 10 elements you have, the more inspiration you have. And I do apologize because I believe there was a second question. That there's two questions there, and the first one I didn't answer yet.
If there's a particular process you use to help people tune into their hearts consistently, yeah. And then he's asking again, and you manage your body by doing something physical, and how do you leap in the heart energy? I think it's the same question as the first question.
Yeah, and there's a lot of studies out there. Heart Math is a great institution to take a look at because they talk about coherence, right? There's a lot of studies that we've done around that. But aligning basically your heart and your mind through breathing, through effective breathing, is the simplest way. Now, walks in nature, like there's let's just say the sexy way of doing it, which is, you can do yoga, you can do meditation, you can do mindfulness. Yoga became a practice, back in the day, and it became sexy here in the Western culture. Same thing is happening to mindfulness and meditation practices. It's become more of a trend, but there's other things you can do too to get centered into your heart, which is, you talked about, Rick, go for walks.
Yeah.
Go for walks in nature. That's even better. Go sit by the water. That's another one that's been shown. Go have fun with people that you love. Watch funny movies and laugh. So give a hug, get a hug. Those are easy ways to get heart-centered. And sometimes we forget about those.
Yeah.
We don't do them because we judge them as not being valuable, right? Like, I'm achieving. I'm not going to go have fun. What is fun, right? But fun is actually a really good way to be connected to your heart, to do something that's filling.
Absolutely. If you take a look at some of the most heart-centered beings on the planet, children, and
Well,
what do?
I was going to
They
point
play.
to that play piece, right? That
Yep.
you know, getting back to our roots. You know, like we're adults, right? We do things differently. But I heard it from one teacher around, like, just sit and watch ants. Just sit and watch ants do their thing. Like, just be curious, right? That I remember doing that as a kid. You know, you'd see an ant colony, right? And it's like, oh, look, there's a watermelon going down. It's like,
there's your lunch.
There's my lunch. Yeah,
I think he's now asking about the 10 elements that I was actually curious about too. Do you
Is
mind?
it in your book?
Yeah, actually, I don't have all of them in the book, but
what?
You know, yeah. So I'm gonna list as many as I can remember here, because sometimes we call them the 10 P's. I don't always remember all the P's, and it takes me a minute to list them out. So the first one, I'll list them out first, and then we can talk about them if we actually have time as well. So one of them we just talked about, which is play. Play is important, and play is important because we are. If you take a look at how we learn as human beings, play is an important part of it.
Oh, 100%.
And it's actually a big part of inspiration, because just think about when you play something, especially sports, right? You are inspired to do something. So play is an important factor. So just give me 30 seconds, or maybe not even 30, 10 seconds. Yeah, I want to make sure I have all the P's here. I'm going to miss one, I know. So I got this written out in front of me. So we have play. That's one thing. But I always start with passion. And this is something that's very important. And passion is important because that is, I would say, one of the top. There's two top ones for me, which are passion and purpose. Purpose has been shown, and so is passion through scientific research, to be very strong motivators, neurochemically, neurobiologically as well. When we are passionate about something, Stanford studies actually showed this. The more passion you put into your goals, the more likely you are to actually achieve them, because you're going to be more persistent and you're going to be more consistent with them. So I always start with passion, because if you can turn your passion into something that has the other 10 elements, you're going to have more inspiration than you can ever imagine. It's going to be long standing. What ends up happening is people do other things. They're not passionate about it, and they wonder why their inspiration fizzles. So passion is one. Purpose is the other one. You know, why are you doing it? Do you have a bigger purpose here? Do you have a bigger meaning behind this? Anytime you have a strong purpose, again, that has been shown to be the number one factor for inspiration, is purpose. So Simon Sinek had it right when he talked about why, and he didn't have the science behind it at that point in time. You know, we're talking about how whenever he wrote that book, it was over a decade ago, I believe. But the science really didn't show that. Science actually shows that now. The power of purpose is so incredible. Because it gets your body going biologically. Another element is power. And what I mean by power is, what are you good at? What are your strengths? Because when you are doing things that you're strong at, where you feel powerful, you have more inspiration. Think about it. If you do things that you're not good at, you're not going to feel powerful until you're good at them.
Differently. Yeah. Yeah.
So as soon as you do something that you feel good at, that you're powerful at, you automatically have more inspiration. So that's another element. The next one is pleasure. So do you actually get pleasure out of what you are doing? And that's not necessarily the same as passion, because there's a fine line and some people get confused between the two. You can have a passion, but it might not be pleasurable. For example, you might have a passion for working out, but it might not be pleasurable to kick your butt at the gym, right?
Yeah.
So pleasure is an important thing. But if you can get pleasure after you work out, right, you feel better. You look in the mirror, you're like, oh, I actually look good, or I lost weight, or whatever it might be. I'm getting healthier.
Get a smoothie.
Yeah.
As a reward.
Yeah. So that's another element. Primary values, a big one. Your primary values are so important because we make our decisions based on values. It's a filter system. And so when your primary values aligned with the other P's, you actually have more inspiration. people lose inspiration when they have conflicting values, or they don't have an understanding of what their values are that align with their goal, their ultimate vision. So if you're making decisions, and people don't even realize this, and they do things that are like, why did I even do that? Or I should have done something differently. It's most likely because their primary values weren't aligned in some way with whatever goal they were looking at or trying to achieve. So that's another element. We also have people pressure. So never underestimate people pressure, because that has so much of an influence on you as an individual. It can give you inspiration, or it could take it away real fast.
Absolutely.
So if you have a supportive spouse versus a non-supportive spouse, or family members or work colleagues or whatever that looks like, it's going to have a big impact on your inspiration levels. So that's one factor. And then profit. And profit doesn't necessarily need to be monetary. It can be profit in some other way, shape, or form, which is essentially what is the benefit that you're getting as a result of that. So profit is one element. We tend to rank that towards the lower end of the inspiration list, but it is a key element. And then the other one is progress. That's the last one. I know I always miss one, but I think I got all 10 of them. Progress is the other one. And here's why. When you are making progress, you have more inspiration. When you are not making progress, or the progress is not at the rate that you want, people tend to get demotivated.
Absolutely.
So I would always encourage, and it's not necessarily the pace, but again, we're talking about Western society, right? We have this thing with doing things fast and hacks and, skipping steps. But if you're making some kind of a progress, you're actually going to continue to be inspired. And that's the most important thing. And most of these elements, if you take a look at them, almost all of them are internally based.
Absolutely. And they're all like work on your motivation, inspiration and motivation. I love this list.
Yeah, no, it's a great list. And the progress piece, right? Like, again, we're so conditioned that it has to be some kind of big grandiose progress. But it's really like, when you really narrow it down to the baby steps or the steps, like even a small step towards your purpose or goal or passion is huge. Like, it is progress.
It is. And it's funny you mentioned that, because it takes me back to a story. When I started to learn Tai Chi, at that time,
there's a story here, isn't there?
Yeah, it was just I'm going to say teacher for all intents and purposes. At that time, he was from China, and he came and he started teaching it. And throughout the first however many lessons I took, it was interesting, because he said, if you ever have any questions, please ask. And I asked this one question, and it was around energy and chi and so forth. And he said, you know what? Ask me that question in 15 years. He's like, you're not ready yet. And I just sat there and I looked at him. I was like, what? You mean I have to wait for 15? And he was serious. And so we talk about progress and progressive steps. And you can say the normal part of me was just like, what the heck? I'm not going to wait 15 years. Are you kidding me? But it was a really interesting lesson for me. That I learned at that point in time, where I was just like, wow, to become a true master at something, not that you have to wait 15 years, but you have to understand that it is a progressive process. It's not something that you skip steps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful story.
It's a big coming.
Yeah, no, that's it.
I would have loved to have seen your face when you said that.
Yeah, I was
wax on, wax off.
Yeah.
What do you mean I gotta wash cars?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. What a great conversation, Party. I've really been enjoying this.
Yeah, thank you. Same here.
Yeah. So how do we?
And Rick, see?
What's that?
He inspires men, works with men, of course.
Well,
it's inspiring to you, to me too, as a woman.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, we're all a yin and yang, like we're, like, just because we have different bodies. I mean, but there's, so So what is your primary focus is men's work primarily?
Well, we have three areas of business, and one of them is business advisory and consulting services and coaching as well. And then we have high performance. So business consulting and advisory, both men and women. We have high performance training for organizations and executive teams, senior leaders and CEOs. That's for both men and women. And then we have a third area where we focus specifically on men. And that's men's leadership, both in business, as husbands, and as fathers. And naturally, 100% of those people are men. And so I would say overall, majority of our clients are men overall, but it's because we have a lot of men in that third category. And we do that because we've created a safe environment for men to have very direct and open conversations. And we are experts. Like, I wrote the book, The Complete Man, because I am a man. I grew up, in being a boy and then eventually a man. And I know what it's like to be a father, as a husband. I don't know what it's like to be a wife, a woman, or give birth or have female hormones. But I'm happy to say we are in the process of co-authoring a book called The Complete Woman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So someone reached out to us, a very amazing person reached out to us and said that she wanted to co-author a book based on the work that we did. She's a PhD, and she's in the medical system as well. And she, so that's a longer endeavor, but we will be putting out that book as well, because I think a lot of women say, well, why not a book for women? And I said, I can't write that on my own. Sorry. I'm out of luck on that one, because it wouldn't be authentic. Right. And we inherently do, and men and women are different fundamentally. Yes. As human beings. Yeah. We have hearts, we have brains, but we operate on different hormones. We are biologically different. We don't have to, honestly, it's not rocket science. When you look at a man, you look at a woman, it's like there's distinct characteristics that are different.
But that has, especially in today's world, there has been like a shift in women pushing. We talk about this so often, getting more in their masculine, trying to be like men, so that we are going to be valued the same way that men are valued. And there's a lot of misunderstandings in there, and a lot of really misalignment with who we are, as women, and a lot of rejections of the parts of us that make us unique, that we be leading from as women with much more power, instead of trying to be so masculine.
Well, I would say the most powerful women I know are the ones that are in their feminine state more often.
Right.
And especially in the business world, it's really interesting. Our women that we work with, the women that are focused on their feminine aspect, have much more power around the executive table. And I always jokingly say to women, you want to be in control, exercise your femininity, because a man in his masculine, when it comes up against a feminine woman, will melt, and not necessarily in a bad way, but in a positive way.
I raised 4 daughters, and that was my key message to them, was you guys have all the power.
Yep.
Kind of a thing, but like your 10 elements, I mean, they're universal, right? The details behind them might be slightly different based on, like you were talking about, but the more you are yourself, the true nature of yourself, not the conditioned self that feels like Fatí was pointing to, I need to be more masculine so I can, in order to, right? The less we focus there and drop that, the more we are ourselves, the more we show up, we can respond accordingly
and be happier
and happy.
And healthier.
Happy and healthier. Exactly. Yeah. No, really, really interesting.
What a wonderful conversation, Purdeep. So I know we're on the top of the hour, but I always want to ask if there was anything that we should have asked you that you would like to speak to, or if there's any last words that you want to leave our audience with, or anything that you want to just highlight.
Well, I think we had a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to thank you. I would say the only other thing that I want to emphasize is when people say, like, okay, how do we change things? What do we focus on? How do I have a healthier or better life? I think the one thing that we always underestimate, because we in science or in society, especially again, Western society, try to rationalize things, and we say use our rational brain, whereas our emotional brain and body is truly in control. So if anybody wants to be more fulfilled, have a better life, be healthier, be more successful, learn how to integrate and master your emotions and use them as an advantage, so to empower you rather than disempower you. You cannot extract your emotions. You actually have to integrate them in. And so by trying to extract them, you become less powerful. And and this has been shown by science, if you actually damage parts of the brain, some of the emotional, you can say, parts of the brain, people start to make bad decisions and they perform, you can say, suboptimally. Yeah. And so if just focus on emotions, and if you can learn and understand your own emotions and live with them and learn how to actually have more empowering emotions, you're going to be a lot more happier and successful.
Yeah,
I absolutely.
Good stuff.
I love that. And I love that it's coming from a man. just start shifting these paradigms. I love the work that you do, and that this is a paradigm shift. It's a change in, social conditioning, the way we think of men and emotions. And, that I love that you pointed to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing, everyone. So I have put all of Purdeep's links in the chat. It's also in the description of the show. Just if you like this episode, make sure that you share it. Help us amplify our impact. You can listen to the podcast. It's going to drop in a couple of days. That's a really good way to listen to this as well. Give us some love, subscribe, like, give us your questions, and see you next time. Have a wonderful week, everyone. And thank you so much for coming on, Purdeep.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.